When he kicked me out, I did what any desperate mother would do. I took whatever work I could find. I scrubbed hallways, emptied bins, and washed the fingerprints from the brass plates of the building where he ruled like a small petty monarch. I did it not to humiliate him, not exactly, but because my 2 children needed food, warm coats, and medicine. Survival makes you practical. It makes you quiet. It turned me into someone who could move through marble lobbies and polished glass without anyone really seeing. My name is not the one they put on those forged papers. Call me Mara Lockwood. The man who signed my life away is called Lucian Mercer. The company he built, the gleaming palace of his reputation, is Arcadia Meridian. When you change names, you change the way a story sits on your tongue. It becomes yours again. On the nights I worked late, I would pass the reception desk where a young woman sat with tired eyes and a mascara halo beneath them. Her name was Lila. She seemed to carry an entire storm in the small of her shoulders. Sometimes she cried quietly so that only the potted ficus plant or the fluorescent light would witness her. I thought at first she was Lucian's lover because who else would look that haunted in a place like that? But gradually the picture sharpened into something different. No romance. Only fear. The day everything changed began with a bucket of gray water and the slow, humiliating ritual of mopping polished stone. My hands were red at the knuckles. From the cold. I had once negotiated contracts, once signed papers that made men nod and clap and placed trust in my calculations. Those hands had held pens that meant decisions. Now they wrung out a mop with the same set of joints, the same bones. Life is a small mercy giver. Sometimes it strips you, then teaches you what remains. He did not look me in the eye when he passed. Me that morning he never did. Lucian preferred the sweep of his own stride to the clumsy truth of anyone else's existence. He told the head of sales, loudly enough for any passing cleaner to hear, that we were incompetent, that we hired trash. He declared divorce as if it were a strategy, not a wound he inflicted. You don't fit my vision, he said once to my face before he locked me out like a broken appliance. You drag me down. I'm not proud of the way I swallowed that. Humiliation. Pride for mothers is often a cost you can't pay. I found the janitorial listing because it was posted on the company bulletin. Ironically, my old company, and the pay was reliable. If I wanted to buy winter boots for my son, Avery, and medicine for little June, I would mop and scrub until my muscles ached. There was a stubborn streak of curiosity, too. I wanted to understand what had happened, to see if there was any rational explanation for the cruelty. So I worked, on a late evening, when the lights were dimmed and the hum of servers replaced human chatter. Lila came into the reception area and startled me with her suddenness. She had the look of someone who had been frightened awake from a nightmare, and was trying to pretend the dream hadn't touched her. She grabbed my arm, breathless and certain, and shoved me into the executive office without explanation. Hide under the desk, she ordered. The words were short, jagged with panic. I hesitated. The impulse to stand, to face whatever was wrong and make it sensible was primal. She pushed me. There was no time to think. The oak of the desk smelled like expensive polish and the kind of arrogance money buys. I slid beneath it and found, in the dark between cables and carpet, the place where cowardice and hope meet. They arrived then, Lucian and a man with a voice like sandpaper, a legal fixer called Conrad Haile, a name that had the texture of bristled rope. My heart felt as if it would beat out of my ribs. I listened as they spoke of charters and powers of attorney, of documents backdated 3 years, of a single terrible sum of money, $5 million, and the subsidiary that bore my name. They treated my life like a ledger, balancing the books by consigning one person to ruin. The signature is flawless, Conrad said, as if he were discussing a fresco. It matches the passport sample exactly. Backdated. Everything aligns. Lucian laughed, that loose, slick sound he made when he felt like an apex predator. She polished these floors. She touches the files. She leaves prints everywhere she goes. Who will believe a janitor? No one. She's the perfect fall guy. When? He said it, when his voice, tame and surgical, affirmed that he had set me up. 2 things happened to me at once. 1, the world bent. 2, my thoughts grew very precise. He had not just left me that morning like a used coat. He had planned to make me the face of his crime. He was not merely cruel. He had orchestrated the humiliation so it would illegal. Teeth. They finished the conversation with a phone call. A call to the emergency line, a call that painted me as a thief still in the building. I understood then what a well-crafted betrayal looks like. It corrals the reality around the narrative you want the world to accept. 10 minutes? Lucian said into the phone. 10 minutes until men with badges, until an anchor of criminality would be dropped into my life, and yet I was not helpless. I had known the building too intimately. I had supervised renovations once. Picked the grain of wood, the placement of panels, the secret little notch that a carpenter leaves when he's too proud of his work. I escaped the desk's shadow into the cavity behind the trophy shelf and fell, as always. That knowledge can be a small weapon if you know where to press it. I ran to the archives. The basement smelled like dust and lost attention. The files were 1,000 small reliquaries of other people's decisions, and there, tucked under the T-tab, Triumph Dynamics ink glittered like a wound. The file bulked with appointment orders, institutional forms, and a signature that could have been mine. I didn't know why the floor felt like it had been pulled out beneath me. Perhaps because my name sat on the header, presented as the sole founder and CEO of a shell company used to funnel public funds, $5 million. The thought of that spine-chilling number turned the air in the room viscous. Then the guard found me. Mr. Halden, a man with hands stained by old tobacco and a memory for the people who once handed in warm pies, shone his flashlight and said in a voice full of questions, "Mara, what are you doing here?" There are moments when a person's whole future is a coin that flips for a breath. I told him the truth. Lucian had set me up. He did not believe me at first. He looked at me as if trying to balance the sum of decades in a few seconds. Then he stepped aside. He told me to run and handed me his coat and oversized relics smelling of old heat and even older favors. "For your kids," he said simply. The world always contains small acts of God disguised as old men. Outside, sirens screamed and the evening turned into a frantic picture. I fumbled for my phone and found a notification that made the blood in my veins turn liquid lead. A transfer. $5 million labeled as a loan from Lucian Mercer's account. Somebody had put the gold in my lap as a noose. If the account showed that I'd been paid 5 million minutes before fleeing, no explanation would ever be credible. Evidence is often a curse when you live on the wrong side of its narrative. There is a particular terror in realizing you are trapped by your own name. I bolted, because that was all I could do. I couldn't call a taxi, everything was a trace. I hitched a ride with a man who saw a frantic woman in too large a coat and handed me the $100 as if it paid for itself. I had nowhere to go until I remembered Lila's address. The girl who pushed me under the desk with her hands like iron and fear like a bell. Her apartment was a tangle of evidence and heartbreak. She screamed when she saw me, knife raised and eyes hollowed by someone who had been used. Then she told me that she had been blackmailed, a video, a hotel room, a camera, and that Lucian had control over more people than he seemed to. She showed me the bruises on her neck and told me how he had made her do things, press buttons his way. "What are we going to do?" she asked. The answer was obvious. Find proof. The one place Lucian thought secure was the gym, the VIP locker. He had a small leather-bound daily planner. He never left it at the office. Lila remembered seeing the number of the locker written on a note, 42. He was vain, he bragged about a bench press number, he used money as an amulet. Greed and hubris are predictable. We drove to the private club in an old sedan that smelled of fast food and late desperation. Leila scanned the card Lucian had given her once, a card with privileges and access, and we slipped into the quiet men's changing room. The locker yielded nothing but a note taped to its back, a taunt, not proof. He was smarter than we'd hoped. He knew where to be careful. He anticipated the holes others would crawl into. The note told me one thing with horrific clarity. He had planned this like a chess player, and he meant to exile my children, to ship them off to a place where no mother could follow. There is no better motivation than a sense of final loss. I drove like a woman possessed. We barreled into the residential block where my sister, Tasha, waited with the children. We arrived to locust lights and a chorus of sirens and agents who seemed to have come out of the ground. My sister tried to hold them off, but the system, once lubricated by money and willing lies, can move with terrifying speed. They took my children and drove them away like someone transporting contraband of my very soul. The shock shore me to something thin and sharp. I felt my life fracture like glass. Rage is a useful tool when carefully used. I told Lila to hide while I went to see a man named Remy Dalton, an old partner of Lucian's who had been stripped of his company and his dignity. He owned a resting plant at the edge of town, and everyone said he had a grudge as broad and deep as a quarry. I needed that kind of man. The sort who keeps people because he knows where their bodies drop. Remy's office smelled of whiskey and machine oil. He didn't stand when I entered. He looked through me and back at me, and finally, when I told him what Lucian had done, the rawness in him turned to a businesslike wound. "You want blood?" he said. "You want to burn a house down?" He did want something else too. The ledger names that might connect his stolen contracts to foreign accounts. He had been chasing Olympus Trading, Northern Stream Limited, names like eddies in the dark. Together we plotted. He gave me a small device, a microphone that would transmit even if the room's bug sweepers listened with holy seriousness. He told me how to act like a piece of furniture, how to stand where the light would not pronounce me, how to be empty and noticed by no one. He made me a server of champagne at the city's premier gala, a glass bearer among people who drank the air like it was oxygen. A woman can cross social classes without anyone really looking twice. The staff are shadows. I learned that the hard way and used it, slipping close in a tray-line labyrinth to the circle where Lucian laughed at other people's dreams as if he were a god. I placed the microphone in his jacket pocket while a passerby bumped my elbow and made champagne spill, and all of their eyes went to a small human calamity. He did not feel the device. He never felt the small betrayals sewn into his lapel, but luck is a jealous mistress. Vivian Mercer, his mother, found my shoes. She noticed the wrongness of lace and rubber soles. Vivian has always loved polish and lineage and how the world announces itself through a pair of shoes. She seized me and dragged me to a service corridor and peeled my mask off like an old stage prop. For a moment, I thought the game was over. Then she spoke a few words that narrowed my world to a pit of frost. "You won't get the children," she hissed. "You either go to prison. For 5 years, we will take them, I will keep them, or you sign and I will look out for them until you return." She handed me a confession folded into quarters and pressed the choice like an abscess. It was a threat in a velvet glove. She knew what mothers value, a feature. She proffered mine at the cost of my freedom. I could not sign away my children. Without understanding where the truth lay in the dark after the gala, Remy handed me a set of recordings. They were crude, a drunk man's vanity shrieked onto a microphone, but the sound of Lucian admitting that he had planned the embezzlement, that he had intended to leave his mother with the ruin she deserved, was a different kind of proof. "We don't send it by phone," Remy said. "We don't let her delete it and turn it into stray static in the cloud. We make Vivian look at it face to face." Morning came, heavy with sleep. I met Vivian at Conrad Hale's office with the recording tucked in my pocket. I walked into the room like someone placing a bomb. I played the audio. Vivian listened like a woman seeing a chink in armor, and then did the most devastating thing a mother can do to someone who begged for mercy. She chose her child, she called the police. She had, of course, long since prearranged everything. The world she lived in responded like a well-trained pack. She had power carved from relationships and forged in money, and she used it to shore her son's ruin, not mine. She let me be taken because she decided I was expendable. The recording was gone before I could understand how she had done it. She had deleted it with the practiced hand of a woman who had learned to erase the threats to her own garden. They dragged me through interrogation rooms where the light was fluorescent gilt. Lucian stood over me and offered mercy like a ransom. "Sign this confession," he said, "and you can kiss your children goodbye on the way to a pretend trip. Otherwise, stay silent and watch them disappear." The choice felt like being asked to pick which limb to lose, but the city has teeth in strange places. Detectives who still remember the taste of honor have odd little methods. Detective Raymond Reyes, an old tired man with fire behind the sternness, entered the room and turned what seemed terminal into a possible inversion. He placed a screen on the table and said nothing. On it, Lila sat in a server room with a trembling light in her hand, streaming live across 10,000 corporate feeds. She showed login logs. She showed server fingerprints. She showed the surveillance footage of Lucian practicing my signature in the dim light of his office, mouthing the strokes like an artist tracing a forgery. The revelations sank into the room like cold water. Lucian's expression cracked. His plans, so carefully arranged, became a web he had trapped himself in. He had, in his arrogance, named me CEO on paper. He had used my name as a legal instrument. That move, intended to make me the fall person, became a legal anchor that the police could use a different way. The bank froze the accounts. The money was locked by banking law because the signatures put me, not him, at the helm. He had given away the key to his vault in a fit of criminal hubris. I watched the world tilt when the law found its teeth. The agents closed in around Lucian like a chorus closing a book. There is a particular sound when handcuffs close on someone who thought themselves untouchable. He screamed in a way that made you understand the difference between being terrified and being found out. What followed was a messy public unraveling. Vivian and Lucian turned on each other in the lobby of the precinct like beasts who thought their claws would win the day. Lawyers tried to rewrite allegiances. I was given a choice by race: sign to return the funds voluntarily and furnish testimony that would unravel the whole network, or enter a procedural limbo that would leave everything entangled while the money remained frozen. I signed the return order. There was nothing appealing about owning stolen money, and nothing worth the steel-cold prospect of my children being taken away forever. Everything moves slowly until it moves fast. In those weeks, indictments rolled out like headline confetti. Conrad Halle admitted to facilitating some things and to having a hairline fracture of courage in another place. Vivian, stripped of polish and power, sat in a cell with only a handbag and the memory of porcelain. Lucian received the punishment his greed demanded. The legal system, imperfect and sometimes cruel, offered the only thing left that mattered: the chance to shield my children. Remy returned my children to me, not because he liked me. He liked the feeling of standing up to a man who had ruined him, but because sometimes the world gives you allies who are even more dangerous in their loyalty than in their hate. He drove up in a black truck with an attitude as big as the moon and handed me a small bundle of keys, new locks for the apartment Lucian had changed, a place where I could start again. He left the scent of motor oil on my hands and the knowledge that revenge seldom fills a stomach. 6 months later, I marched through the same marble halls I'd once mopped. This time I wore a suit that fit like a promise. The marble was the same veined stone, the lights the same trick of reflection, but the way people stepped aside had changed. They nodded now, not because their feet found me in the gutters, but because they recognized a different currency: competence. I did not relish firing people who had turned their faces away, but I did not make choices for the sake of vindication. I replaced poor performers, lifted those who had quietly worked, and tried to make the company something cleaner than it had been. Lila left the building soon after. She had to. The place that had been the stage for the worst parts of her life could not be a refuge for healing. I paid for a course that would allow her to start again and watched her leave with a small suitcase and a future that was hers too. Ruin or build. Remy kept a little corner of the old plant and built a small, honest consulting firm that would not cheat suppliers. We ironed out old agreements and burned the parts that were rotten. There were times when the temptation to savor that slow, delicious wave of justice rose in me. I could have leaned back and basked in the ruin of people who had made me feel useless. But revenge, I discovered, is a hollow inheritance. The thing I had wanted all along was a simpler rescue: to see my children at breakfast, to feel June's small fist curl around my finger, to hear Avery's terrible jokes. Triumph is small when measured by halls and titles. It is enormous when measured by the quiet of a child's sleep. Some old things remain. Vivian wrote letters from her cell that smelled faintly of perfume and contained controlled regrets. She petitioned for visitation that I refused because I had learned that some wounds do not speak with words, but with the quiet of the decisions they seed. Lucian appealed. His legal team tried every angle. The court's machinery says justice is a long spool of thread, and sometimes it is. It also says that when the truth accumulates, even the most elegant deceit unravels. I learned to run a business on paper and intuition. I learned to read accounts like a farmer reads the sky. I learned that operating the company cleanly was a kind of absolution, a way to make sure nobody could ever again marshal the machinery of power against those who lived barely above its gears. I signed contracts, hired managers, and sometimes, late at night, I would walk the corridors I once scrubbed and think of the small miracle that his dignity returned. People ask me what I would have done if the detective had never turned up. The server logs, I do not know. Perhaps I would have been crushed. Perhaps I would have run until I was no longer a person but a rumor. I think perhaps I would have still kept a small stubborn hope tucked like a stone in my mouth. Hope is a kind of grit, you can almost turn it into diamonds if you press hard enough. There were other quiet victories I don't announce to the news. Leila found a studio that smelled of paint and possibility. She started a course in design and came by to tell me once, with a small, nervous smile, that she had decided to stop being frightened. Remy began a modest scholarship for the children of workers who lost jobs to corporate tricks. He called it the Labor Fund, and sometimes he would show up at the office and sit with us in the conference room like an old pirate who had found a conscience. Tasha moved into an apartment near mine with my children and learned to cook more than instant meals. We are not a perfect family. We are a gathered thing stitched back by practical seams. Once, on an afternoon that smelled like rain and cinnamon from a cart on the corner, I walked by the old lobby and paused. A woman flipped her hair at me and smiled a small, guarded smile. "Miss Lockwood," she said, and for the first time, I did not feel that old hollow of shame. My name is an ordinary thing, nothing lacquered, nothing gilded. It fits me like an honest coat. I keep the oak desk in my office light and airy. No heavy leather-bound instruments, no trophies of dominance. On the wall is a photograph of the three of us on a park blanket with melting ice cream under the sun. I allow myself simple pleasures now, a slow cup of coffee before morning meetings, a promise not to miss recitals or soccer games, the tiny, rebellious habit of lying on the floor and letting June clamber on my chest so her laughter bumps like a bell. People ask me why I didn't press charges beyond what was necessary. Why I sometimes sat in court and listened without snatching at vengeance. I tell them that systems can correct wrongs only up to a point. Beyond that point, it becomes about reconstructing a life. You cannot solely build your home on the demolition of another's castle. You must rebuild the rooms you need and let the rest be rubble. It is slower, but it lasts. Sometimes at night, before the house settles into sleep, I think about small kindnesses, Mr. Halden's coat and how it smelled. The way Lila pushed me without thinking of herself, Remy's grudging loyalty. People who are small in the public eye can be enormous in the private one. They are the backbone of a life that refuses to break under pressure. There is a kind of quiet heroism in returning to the place where you were once invisible and standing tall. It is not a public triumph like headlines and fireworks. It is the hum of fluorescent lights that no longer sting your eyes, of meetings that you conduct with clarity and decency, of children tucked in bed with their breathing soft and regular. Lucian sat in a cell that reeked of institutional bleach and regret. He had always seemed like a man sealed in a glass box. Getting him out required a hammer I did not have. The law did it. Vivian sat alone in visiting rooms with a handbag and her diminished armor. I let them be. I learned that mercy is a live thing. It can be chosen or denied. I chose to deny that kind of mercy to people who would weaponize my children. Months turned into a softer rhythm. The company became cleaner not just in its janitorial sense but in its ethics. We instituted transparent procurement and open accounting. We built safeguards. I met once with a woman from the Treasury who thanked me, not with civility but with a real human gratitude. The money that had been stolen was returned. It was not a fountain of wealth for me. It was a stone that closed a wound. If someone asks me what the hardest part was, I say it was the moment I had to put down the pen in the interrogation room and look into the eyes of the man who had thought he could buy morality. The hardest was deciding to play the long game and not the short vengeance. That night I had to weigh whether I would sign away my life for a goodbye that might be crueler than a permanent loss. I chose the longer path because I loved my children more than I loved my anger. Life continues its quiet trade. There are tedious board meetings and children's recitals and days when the laundry piles like a small mountain. There are nights when sleep will not come and the past rattles like a loose hinge in the darkness. But then June will call me Mama with the wrong word for toothbrush, and Avery will insist on showing me a ridiculous trick he taught his friend, and the sound of them will erase 1,000 small cruelties. People ask if I ever regret the janitor job. I say I do not. It taught me an important lesson. Dignity is not in the badge you show, but in how you hold your back while doing work nobody remembers. It taught me to listen for the small patterns. of a building, the hum of the servers, the way certain doors have a squeak, and that listening taught me to find a way when all doors seemed shut. When I walk those same corridors now, I do it with my head not bowed but not arrogant. I pass a woman who wipes down the brass rail and I meet her eyes and say hello. She sometimes flinches, unaccustomed to recognition. I offer her a nod and the nod is for both of us. Not everyone gets a second chance. If you get one, you honor it with steady steps. I've been asked if I would ever go back to the life where my hands sign contracts for marble and glass. I already did, but I do it differently. I sign things with thought. I think about the little people whose names are not printed on the payroll but who make the company a living organism. I ask questions I once would have delegated. I hire with a mind that remembers humiliation. I am, in a small way, the custodian of a different kind of dignity. When I tuck my children in at night now, I tell them stories only their mother would tell, about how their baby kicks once in the dark, about how the world can be mean but will sometimes be honored by those who choose justice over money. I tell them in small, concrete ways that their worth is not measured in dollars or doors. I tell them the truth in a voice that is steady and soft. People think that life after a scandal is a return to normal. It is not. Normal becomes something new, a constructed architecture of careful decisions. You build it with the people who did not abandon you and the ones who, like me, have learned to do brave things in small, quiet ways. You rebuild trust like plastering a wall, smooth and patient, layer upon layer. If you are listening to this as a story of hurt and of clawing back, remember the small acts, the guard who handed me a coat, the young woman who pushed me to the floor because she feared for her own skin, the old partner who found a way to make me visible. Heroes are often people who move quietly in the margins. They're not always victorious in the way you expect. They do not always wear medals. But they show up when math and mercy crumble, and they remind us that human lives are not just ledger entries, and if by some small chance this reaches someone who feels invisible like I did, if life has pushed you to the edge of what you think you can endure, know this. Sometimes being forced into the margins gives you vantage points other people never see. You learn the secret notches in the world. You learn where the light leaks through. You can step out again, perhaps different, perhaps softer, perhaps harder, but alive and breathing. The marble lobby still gleamed as marbles do, but its reflection was now of me and my children and the small company of people who believed a life could be reclaimed. I opened the glass door to the office and felt the winter air brush my face. It was cold, yes, but it was honest. I thought of all the people who think that power makes a person untouchable. Power can punish. It can also make a person reckless. I thought of the long, slow work of rebuilding and smiled, because I had a broom and a ledger and a very stubborn heart, and that, in the end, was enough.